Chapter 21. Return to the Bastion. Michael struggled to lift the massive shoulder plate of the phalanx armor off of the floor of the tent. The thing had to weigh almost as much as he himself did, around 250 pounds if his guess was right. Well, now that Michael was back at full strength, or as good as anyway, he needed to put his muscles back to work. Helping 37 put his armor on would be a good way to get him to ache. Lance had gotten Michael a pair of burlap trousers for him to wear earlier that morning, something he had taken from her gratefully. Michael knew that he had a penchant for being overconfident, though that confidence didn't make him want to walk around in the nude like Hoplite did. The pants were itchy though, real itchy, and the sweat now caking his legs only served to make it chafe. Helping Hoplite put on his armor had proved to be a more excruciating process than he thought, especially since Michael couldn't very well scratch his itchy legs while his hands were occupied with holding hundreds of pounds worth of metal in place. As soon as Michael finished helping Hoplite gear back up, then he'd be able to put on his own, less itchy standard-issue marine plate. That was something Michael felt real comfortable in. Nothing boosted confidence quite like knowing that you were covered in an ultralight tungsteel alloy from head to toe. But even tungsteel was nothing compared to adium, from what Michael had heard. He finally managed to slide the heavy plate onto Hoplite's shoulder, the super soldier sitting with his armored legs crossed over one another. Hoplite turned his mostly bald head, grabbing the plate from Michael with one hand and holding it in place. This was the last piece, besides the helmet, that needed to be fastened. Apparently, when Hoplite was on his own, it took him hours to do this by himself. With Michael here to help out, that greatly sped up the process, but it still took over an hour of constant back-breaking work. "All right," Hoplite said. "I'll hold it like we did with the other side. You wiggle it until it clicks into the groove." "Yes, sir," Michael replied, gripping the sides of the wide plate and wiggling it until he heard that oh-so-satisfying click of metal on metal. Hoplite stood to his full height then, moving his arms and lifting his legs in sequence to ensure that the phalanx suit had been assembled properly. After a few seconds of opening and closing his hands, Hoplite nodded and turned to stare into Michael's eyes with those golden orbs of his. How did his eyes get like that? Sure, there were cosmetics that let people change their eye color, and there were some mutations that might change folks' eyes to gold, but this was a frickin' Hoplite. Hoplites didn't do cosmetics or have mutations. They were the pinnacle of natural humanity. His eyes just have to be like that, right? "Thank you, Private," Hoplite told him, gathering his smooth helmet from the ground and sliding it over his head with a click of metal. "Don't mention it, sir," Michael replied. "So, sorry, I'm sort of confused. What's the mission right now?" he asked after a small pause. "There are multiple objectives, Private," Hoplite told him. "Currently, we need to return to the Bastion. Lance will need permission from the Harkal in order to accompany us." Michael scrunched his face in thought. "You want to bring her along to find the crew, sir?" he asked. "I ain't really against it, but why?" "She's a local," Hoplite said simply, leaning down again to scoop up that monster of a shotgun next to his bedroll. "I believe we can trust her to help us find our way around the planet." Michael took a moment to admire the shotgun in Hoplite's hands. Far too oversized for a normal man to wield, true. But despite that, Michael found himself desiring to feel the kick of that beast. It wasn't every day you saw a Magnus up close like this. Michael knew that the gun was based off of an old design from the pre-Jinn era of Earth, but despite the ancient origins of the model, it looked far from archaic. Once Michael was done admiring the Magnus, he turned his attention back to Hoplite. "All right, so she'll be our guide," Michael said with a nod. "I dig it. Didn't you say earlier we'd be going to the Fiendwood to look for pods?" "Affirmative," Hoplite replied. "I believe more shuttles crashed to the east of our current location. I was unconscious for a long time before I managed to make it planet-side. The crew of the Sparrow must have landed toward another end of the planet, based on the world's rotation at the time of evacuation." If good old nasty Nate managed to get off the Sparrow, he'd definitely be to the east then, based on what Hoplite was saying. Michael hoped more than anything that Nathan survived, both the assault on the Sparrow and the chaotic evac. He was a really good guy, and he didn't deserve to die yet. Michael nodded again. "Cool. That means there's going to be some aliens in need of a blasting too. Michael said with a small smirk. They definitely got the hell off the dragon after it got cut in half. He finished, looking at the bundle of freshly cleaned black armor laying next to his own bedroll. Hoplite nodded his helmet as he moved to leave the tent. Affirmative. So we'll need to be on our toes. Suit up. I'll wait for you outside. The rounded open-faced black helmet gleamed in the sunlight when Hoplite opened the flap. Glorious rays of sunlight flowing in to illuminate every corner of the tent. Michael froze with sudden fear for a second when the flap closed behind Hoplite, but he steadied himself. It was dim in the tent, not pitch black. He'd be in a lot darker places in the future. As long as he could see what was around him, Michael would manage. He had to. He did well last night with those fireflies. It was too bad the little guys couldn't come with them. But Michael hadn't felt like keeping them trapped in the jar when he awoke that morning. That jar now sat empty outside the tent, Michael having released the little fellas so they could do whatever it was fireflies did. No point in keeping them trapped in there till they died. He took a deep, shaky breath as he removed the itchy burlap pants, sliding on the slick black Kelvinite underlay for his armor before fastening on the bulky plates. Compared to heaving those slabs of andium around, the tongue steel felt like it weighed nothing. The familiar heft of the armor sat comfortably on his frame, and Michael smiled, rapping a fist on his helmet to produce a clang. Good old-fashioned tongue steel. It could stop practically anything unless it was hit with plasma. Well, even then, tungsteel only slagged a little bit. Usually the wearer died from the heat of the plasma well before the armor was destroyed. He was pretty sure that the locals wouldn't have anything capable of punching straight through his armor, unless maybe they had an old 50 cal lying around. Hoplite had said to be cautious despite that, of course, and if 37 said to be careful, then Michael was damn sure going to follow that advice. The super soldier had still been on about what he called anomalous abilities, and now that Michael was completely back to tip-top shape, he had remembered someone had glowed on him. It had been a pleasantly warm glow that had made him feel all kinds of right, but as Michael recalled, it was just the hand that glowed, not some kind of fancy-smancy tech. An anomalous ability like Hoplite claimed? Or how the locals called it, magic? Hoplite had been talking to Michael for the duration of suiting up, and from what 37 thought, the reason these people spoke Genesian was because a turn-in ended up here far in the world's past. Assuming that really was what happened, who had it been? Who taught these folks Genesian? It had apparently been the common language on this planet since the First Age, all the way up to the 10th Age, Takuma, which was the age that was currently ongoing. Apparently it had been going strong for about 2,003 years now, though. Michael didn't think the timeline added up right. If Takuma was 2,000 years, how long were the other ages before it? Genesian only became standard around 2,000 years ago. Oh, wait. What if Arculus years were longer than Turnan's standard solar years? 365 days in 24-hour cycles. The days seemed to follow standard Earth rotation, though. Maybe it was a matter of more days in a year? He'd ask Lance about it later, but he was pretty sure he was onto something. Michael moved to leave the tent, but paused, eyeing the wonderful bag of guns between the bedrolls. It simply wouldn't do to go outside without carrying a little slag with him, would it? Michael grinned as he began arming himself, holstering a black standard issue pistol and grabbing up the semi-automatic scout rifle. Michael loved the precision of the scout rifle, the tracking scope able to lead his eye to any nearby skull that was in need of a good misting. Michael put his eye onto the scope after clicking it on to make sure it was still operational. When he saw the little digital red box floating around the reticle, looking for vitals to lock onto, he smiled. Even without the help, Michael had always been a crack shot at the range. He had been about to begin proper sniper training, but sadly that had never come to be. He loaded a few spare magazines and stuffed them into one of his tack pouches, the full sacks bouncing against his waist as he strutted outside of the tent with a smirk. Hoplite stood next to a tall tree, looming over Lance like a skyscraper as she spoke up to him, a suffering expression on her face. "It will be faster," Hoplite told her. "Michael can ride on my back." Michael scrunched his brow as he stared at 37. Ride on his back? What the hell was he talking about? Michael briefly considered if he had misheard Hoplite, But then Lance spoke. "My gut cannot take such a trip," she said with her shoulders slumping. "I will die." "Negative," Hoplite told her. "You will experience nausea, but that will not kill you." "I know it won't kill me," Lance snapped, crossing her arms beneath her breasts. "It will just set me on the path to death." "You are overreacting," Hoplite told her flatly. Michael winced at hearing that. Out of all the things to say to a girl, that was certainly not one of them. Michael had once said those very words to one of his older sisters, and his head had practically got bitten off. Thankfully, Lance didn't kill Hoplite instantly with her next words. "My gut will overreact. If we're going to do this, can we at least go at a horse's pace?" Lance asked him in a pleading tone. Michael began wisely. "Sir, what's she talking about?" "We need to return to the Bastion as quickly as possible," Hoplite explained, tilting his helmet toward Michael. "I will carry Lance, and you will ride on my back." Michael frowned. "Sir, I don't know if that's a really good idea." "Not that I'm saying no, of course," Michael explained quickly. "It's just that, well, I gotta carry the tent and guns probably, right?" he asked. "If I'm on your back, won't you run and make all that bounce around?" "We will secure our equipment by tying it to my free arm," Hoplite replied immediately. Michael nodded with a sigh. "Yes, sir." Lance groaned but moved to begin packing up the tent. Michael followed after, and the two of them worked to pull down the huge tent as Hoplite kept watch. Michael was actually glad Hoplite didn't insist on helping them take down the tent. What if those huge metal hands bent one of the poles keeping this thing upright? Thankfully, he and Lance took a little time in deconstructing it. It hadn't been nearly as hard as setting it up had been. Once it was done and the tent was all nice and packed away, Lance took the big canvas bundle over to Hoplite, and she and Michael began trying to tie it down to 37's left arm, bunching it up under the shoulder plate to make room for the bag of guns to be tied down as well. Michael checked to make sure that the mouth of the gun bag was secure, and that the ropes holding it in place wouldn't allow it to bounce around. It would be just Michael's luck for a gun to tear through the bag from the speed of Hoplite's sprint. Back when he was 7 years old, Michael might have killed to get a piggyback ride from 37. Now, as the opportunity presented itself to Michael, the thought of holding on for dear life to Hoplite's back as the fridge suit set off at full speed through the dense wilderness, well, it made him a bit nervous. 19 was a suitable age to die at, right? Michael supposed he'd find out if Hoplite accidentally clipped a tree on the way back to this bastion. "Lance," Hoplite began, "see if you can tie some rope around Michael, so he doesn't have to struggle to keep a grip." Michael then let out a sigh of relief. Why hadn't he thought of that? Now that he was covered in tongue steel, he wouldn't get rope burn either. He'd just look like a toddler riding on a metal gorilla's back. Maybe speeding through the forest while riding on the back of a legend would turn out to be pretty sick. Assuming they didn't crash, of course. "All right. But before we leave, I wanted to let you know that Twindle and the rest of them are going to be heading into the Fiendwood soon," Lance began. "I know that we will be going through there as well to look for your friends, so Twindle said they would wait to go in with us. In such a cursed land as that, you will need as many people to guard your back as you have hairs on your head." Michael didn't bring up the fact that Hoplite was practically bald. But hey, in his opinion, if the Fiendwood really was that awful, he wouldn't be opposed to having more folks along for the ride. What would 37 think, though? As far as Michael was concerned, the big man was in charge. There was also the fact that Hoplite outranked Michael by about 1 billion times over. But even if Michael had been an admiral, he still would have jumped when Hoplite said to. "What is their objective?" Hoplite asked her. Lance actually seemed to turn a bit pale before she answered. "They seek to burn the rotting Ilum, and to slay Kazan, Lord of Hatred." "Oh, they want to kill the guy who crashed my pod?" Michael asked, before slamming a fist into an open palm. "I'm game." Yeah, this Kazan chump pulled his shuttle out of the atmosphere and all. But with 37 around, it wouldn't be that hard to put Kazan 6 feet under. Hoplite did not seem to share in Michael's enthusiasm, as he merely stood there silently, waiting for Lance to continue. After a moment, she did so, taking in a deep shuddering breath. "Kazan is the one who tainted the old Feywood, in an attempt to ascend to the pillars. turning it into the Fiendwood we know today. That was when Takuma was still young. She resumed, her tone still maintaining that serious edge. He is powerful. None who have tried to end him have ever returned. Though in truth, no one knows if those adventurers even reached Kazan before the dangers of the Fiendwood claimed their lives. She said with a despairing sigh. I fear that Twindle and her friends are trying to bite off more than they can chew. With our quest, at least, I'm more confident in our success, she said with a bit more certainty. To be truthful, I would not accompany you into the Feywood if I thought we would perish. I believe we will find your comrades, and if they have weapons like yours, I'm sure they're still alive. Lance finished with a nod, though her face still retained that nervous paleness. Hoppet remained silent for a moment before speaking. Kazan is not our objective, he said. If you don't want to go into the Fiendwood, you do not have to, Hoppet told her. Michael had expected Hoppet to say something along the lines of, Affirmative, I will just shoot him in the face, or something like that. Actually, that sounded more like something Michael himself would say. It was too bad that Hoppet wasn't interested in brutalizing Kazan, but finding their comrades was admittedly the more important objective. And once they linked back up with some more troops, Michael would want to make a pit stop, to put a bullet between Kazan's stupid yellow eyes. It was Kazan's fault all those people died. Kazan's fault that Michael had been stuck in the rotting dark for days. He hated Kazan. Lance, however, looked terribly nervous, her face still pale with fear. It's all right, Lance, Michael told her with a grin. If I see this Kazan chump, I'll pop him in the face with this baby. He finished, patting his rifle with a smile. And hey, like the big guy said, you don't gotta go with us. We can handle it from here if you're scared. He couldn't wait to try it out on Kazan, if they ran into him. I appreciate it, both of you, Lance said with a grateful nod. But my mind is set. I will be going with you into the Fiendwood. Affirmative, Hoplite replied. Now, please help tie Michael onto my back. Lance smirked before giving a small giggle. Michael goggled at Hoplite. What the hell? Did he actually just say please? Lance must be one scary lady to be able to get 37 acting polite. Lance then gave Michael a look of sympathy before saying, I hope your guts are as strong as your words, boy. If they aren't, we'll have to spend hours cleaning them off Hoplite's armor. Michael wouldn't puke on Hoplite, right? He couldn't bear the thought of it. As Michael approached Hoplite's back, he spotted something hanging from the super soldier's waist. It was the pouch he'd received from Gali, the medal. Hoplite had not gotten rid of it. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you're new here, welcome aboard. Check out the description for the story and join the Discord if you like. Consider supporting the channel and the author as well. It's a dangerous world out there, but remember to be brave and look up to seek the stars.